Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but I'm still your host again. With me today, I have two people on our panel. Let's first welcome Dan Shapir, coming all the way from Tel Aviv.
Hey, nice to be here.
And, of course, in the purple room, AJ O'Neill. How you doing, AJ?
Yo, coming at you live from lower back pain.
Lower back pain. That sounds like a place I don't want to be, although I'm there frequently, it seems.
Hey, folks, this is Charles Maxwood. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people that want to update their resume and find a better job. And I figure, well, why not just share my resume? So if you go to topenddevs.com/resume, you enter your name and email address, then you'll get a copy of the resume that I use, that I've used through freelancing, through most of my career, as I've kind of refined it and tweaked it to get me the jobs that I want. Like I said, topenddevs.com/resume will get you that. And you can just kind of use the formatting. It comes in Word and Pages formats, and you can just fill it in from there.
So today we are panelist only guest. Our guest today had to reschedule. So we have decided that we are going to talk about war stories. Not real war, just stories, things that have come up over the years as we've worked in technology and learned things and what to do and what not to do. So we each have at least one story that we're going to share that hopefully will enlighten you of things to do or not to do, depending on the situation. So we'll start out with Dan. What do you got for us, Dan?
Okay, so it's an interesting story from a while back. I'm trying to figure out, kind of remember exactly when it happened. I'm thinking something like 15 years. It was a past employer, and it kind of, the lesson that it taught me was to never assume when you're setting out to improve something, especially performance, that you're supposed to always measure and make sure that where you're optimizing or looking or improving is actually the real bottleneck and not something that you kind of assume is the actual bottleneck. So it was an interesting project. It was actually nothing having directly to do with the web. Well, actually it kind of was. The system that we're talking about was a system that enabled legacy systems, like think even mainframes, be accessed from modern systems. For example, let's say you want to build a web interface in front of a mainframe. So a lot of these legacy systems don't have built-in APIs that you can use, like, web services or stuff like that these days we kind of take for granted. Instead, more or less, the only interface that they have is like a console. So it might be like something that emulates some sort of a terminal. I think like one of those IBM terminals. So a lot of banks and insurance companies often still have these types of legacy systems, and it's really difficult to replace them. So until you're able to do that, what you do instead is you kind of put a facade in front of them that enables you to automate the access to them. So I worked with a company that created such systems, at least back at that time. And it would be kind of this sort of a middleware server that had a web service interface on the one end and communicated using some sort of a legacy terminal protocol on the other end. So you could make web service requests, let's say, to either get information from that legacy system, effectively getting the information as if you were a terminal, reading the content out of the text returned and sending this information down as a response to that web service, or alternatively even enter information into the system. So you do a form post and actually fill in fields that you send through that terminal interface into that legacy system. So that's how you could both read and write information out of those types of systems. And like I said, then you could, let's say, build a web interface to replace that legacy terminal. Is that kind of clear so far?
So we're talking about baud here. How many 7-bit bytes you can send per second, right?
Well, it's not really such an issue because at the end of the day, your middleware is probably residing on the back end next to that legacy system. So bandwidth is not an issue there. It's more, think about it this way. Let's say you want to enable people to see their bank balance, and that bank is actually using such a mainframe to host all the customer accounts, and the only way to easily access that information is through terminal emulation. So it's kind of an automated facade in front of a terminal emulator.
So what I'm questioning is, are we talking serial console terminal?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So like the kind of thing where you have to specify what baud you want to use for the serial interface to be able to interact with the terminal.
Well, it might be even other protocols like token ring or whatever, but let's not even go there. These are legacy systems. And the company that I worked with had originally implemented such a middleware server to create web services on top of those legacy systems using C++ on Windows. Like they use the direct Windows API, like socket APIs and stuff like that. And then we said, yeah, but we would like to be able to host that middleware on various other server platforms, like, let's say a Linux server instead. So instead of rewriting it in C++ using different APIs, the idea was let's just do it in Java. I mean, Java is great on the back end, in a middleware type server. And Java has all the socket APIs and whatnot and thread pooling and whatever. So you could build such a middleware server in a fairly straightforward sort of a way. And so the project was undertaken to implement it using Java. And it worked, but it was much, much slower than the C++ version of that middleware server, like 10 times slower. And the programmers that worked on it kind of said, well, it's Java, it's JVM, it's garbage collected versus C++, which is native. That's probably the reason. And I didn't accept that answer because it seemed to me that at the end of the day, this is just, translation between formats. And, there shouldn't be a reason that Java would be that much slower than a C++ version. So initially, I did the wrong thing, which is basically just that I wasn't familiar with the project, but I had the basic understanding of how it worked. So basically, I just downloaded all the source code down to my computer, opened it in the whatever development environment I was using back then. I don't even remember. Started to go over the code and looked for bad code that I thought was inefficient. And I found plenty of code that was inefficient. So I did a lot of various improvements in the code. And it seemed to me that I, must have solved the problem. So I, pushed my changes, built a system, tested it out. And guess what? I did make an improvement of about 1%. Yeah. So it turned out that I did, in fact, optimize a lot of things, but I didn't optimize things that were on the critical path, or I didn't optimize the actual real bottlenecks. If you take something that at the end of the day only consumes, let's say, 5% of the total runtime and improve that tenfold, you've only improved runtime, but by what? For something percent. That's like kind of what I had achieved. I had in fact made some significant improvements to the code, but I didn't improve the code that was the actual bottleneck of the system. And the reason was that, like I said, I went based on intuition rather than based on actually measuring. So my next step was to use a profiler. For those of you who don't know, a profiler is a tool where you can actually run scenarios and then measure where the application actually spends its time. There are various ways in which such profilers can work. They can either instrument the actual code so that every time they enter or exit a function in the code, it actually create a timestamp, so you know exactly which functions are called in what order and how long each function actually takes to run. That's one way. Another way is to do this sort of a polling where it let's say every millisecond, it actually just goes and checks the call stack and sees where in the application the execution is actually taking place. Either way, what you're actually doing is measuring what parts of the application actually run when and how long each and every one takes. So you can literally drill down and see how long every function in the code that actually gets executed takes to run. And by the way, this type of profiler exists for JavaScript, for web development. For example, in the Chrome DevTools, you have the performance tab, which has exactly that type of functionality. And consequently, I use it today quite often when I'm trying to optimize or even just understand how a particular web application actually behaves. It's a really great tool when you're kind of coming to grips with an application that you're not familiar with, let's say, and trying to understand, how it actually operates in real world scenarios. So anyway, I profiled it, and it turns out that indeed the bottleneck was totally not where I expected. I thought that the bottleneck must be in the code that does the transformations on the data, that takes the data that's received through the web service and then transforms it so as to send it to the legacy system, or takes the responses from the legacy system and then transforms them in order to send them back to the web service, because ultimately that was the core functionality in that middleware. But it turns out that the bottleneck was somewhere totally different. It turns out that the API that was used on the web services side, because we were talking 15 years back, it wasn't JSON, it was XML. And turns out that the code that parsed the XML was very inefficient. It turns out that the way that the XML was parsed is that instead of using some sort of stream parsing, it constructed the entire DOM object for the XML. So the way that it worked turned out was that due to, how it is that sometimes when you implement some code and you're trying to do this kind of a separation of concerns or encapsulation, and you do it at the wrong level. So basically what they did when they implemented it, they would pass that XML down into a component. It would parse that XML to get the data that it needed, and then would throw that parsed DOM away because it had its data. And then that XML would be passed to some other component in the system, which would do it again, and to another subsystem, which would do it again. So that same XML got parsed multiple times, each time just to extract a particular value. So
how did you find code that I was written before I was born?
Well, that you had written, you mean?
That I don't know what I said. Yeah. How did you find code that I had written before I was even born?
First of all, I assume it's not before you were born, because like I said, it was about 15 or something years ago, and I assume you're older than 15.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah. Okay. No, I'm not, Dan. I'm not. Thanks for bringing that up.
But anyway, by the way, that kind of a pattern is something that I've encountered, unfortunately, many times throughout my career. Not specific, not to such an extreme degree, but that concept of, due to encapsulation, performing that same operation on data multiple times in different subsystems or different components, just because each one of them is encapsulated from the other, is something that I've definitely encountered multiple times, in which case you need to be able to view the system as a whole, realize that that's taking place, perform that parsing at a higher level so that you can pass the data in a format that actually matches what the different components need, without each and every one of them needing to go through that process independently.
So I'm actually working on something right now where I am kind of doing that, but it could come back to bite someone in the future, but it's easier to pass around the string value that's an encoded representation of some data than it is to pass around the data. It's just generically more useful to be working in the string format and to expect it. But I think in my particular case, and in the cases where I've done that, it kind of falls into that 5% scenario you were talking about, where the bulk of what the application is going to be doing is not parsing this string and passing it around. The bulk of what the application is going to do is other stuff, and the string is just useful. But I do find it odd that a parser would choose that strategy, because it seems that writing a parser, that everything needs to have that information all the way down.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's what they did. So basically what I did, my main fix, so my primary fix was essentially just to parse that XML once, hold on to that parsed tree of objects, and then pass that around instead of passing around the XML string, and basically reduce the number of parses from 4 or something like that to 1. Also, I used a more efficient parsing engine or parsing strategy. And also, I even did some data sanity checks on the raw string before I even parsed it the first time. So if the string was bad, because that could happen, you could cut off before you even parsed it, but just doing a string search or something like that. The end result was that after that optimization, the Java version actually ran faster than the C++ version. And by the way, after all these optimizations, then the previous optimizations that I did actually started to make an impact as well, because now they weren't just the 5%. Now they were suddenly something like a 30%, because I had removed, a lot of the other overhead. So now those optimizations actually started to make an impact as well. But that was just icing on the cake, as it were. But the important lesson that I've learned, and something that I now do whenever I'm tasked with actually improving the performance of any system, is first I make sure that I'm actually able to measure what the current performance is. Then I make sure that I'm able to actually analyze that performance to understand where the system spends its time. That way I identify the bottlenecks, focus specifically on those bottlenecks, and after I make these changes and I verify that all those changes that I've made actually have made an improvement, then I effectively just repeat the process. So I don't try to optimize the entire system as a whole. Each and every time, after I have a system in place to actually monitor the performance of the system, each time I focus on the most significant bottleneck. I optimize that, again, only after I verified based on the real data, not my assumptions, that is actually the bottleneck. And by the way, very often when I, speak with the people who've built the system, because, this is something that I'm often brought in to do, they are usually surprised by what I identify to be like the main bottleneck. They have their various ideas. It's probably here, it's probably there, and they're almost always wrong. Even though it's their system, the system that they built, and they have intuitions about it, usually their intuitions are wrong. And like I said, after I address a particular bottleneck, I don't immediately try to move to the next bottleneck, because once you've made such changes to the system, the bottlenecks tend to change. It's like, when you have like a freeway and like there's a certain intersection where it tends to have traffic jams, and they make like changes and and now those traffic jams are gone. But what actually happens is that that traffic jam often moves down the line, and it might move to somewhere where previously there was no traffic jam, because, there was a trickle of traffic coming in from the previous one, so a traffic jam never formed. But now that previous point was addressed, that's when like the traffic jam moved. So like I said, I usually repeat that process iteratively until I get to that point where we can say, okay, now performance is good enough. And alternatively, the cost of improving performance from this point going forward is significant to the extent that, we need to consider our options. But that's a really important lesson that I've learned, and fortunately not that late in my career or sufficiently early in my career, that you should never assume about that you can figure out where performance bottlenecks are. You always need to measure and identify them based on either real world data or just profiling the application in real world scenarios.
Well, that would make sense considering the well-known adage about the danger of assuming, period, regardless of what you're
Oh,
assuming
yeah, for sure.
about, right?
I'm a huge proponent of doing anything that you do based on data. Now, you don't always have data. A lot of us operate in situations where data is lacking or insufficient, but often you have more data than you actually realize, especially if you're willing to put some effort into properly collecting it. And by the way, it kind of leads to situations in which I kind of have to push back on people. So, for example, I'm brought in to help with a project that has performance issues, and I notice that project does not have sufficient data being collected. I resist attempts to push me to try to start optimizing it or tell the team how to optimize it before I get sufficient data. And sometimes, I get pushed hard and I push back because I know that if I start optimizing with insufficient data, like I said, either I'll optimize the wrong thing or maybe I'll optimize the right thing, but I wouldn't know that I actually made any difference. If I'm not properly measuring the system, how do I know that I'm actually improving things and not making things worse? You're all nodding in agreement, so I assume you agree with me.
Nodding. All right.
There's no argument to be made.
Which is a bummer.
Yeah, and by the way, like I said, and I'll repeat it again, I think that the Performance tab in the Chrome DevTools is an amazing tool that unfortunately a lot of web developers are not sufficiently familiar with. And like I said, its primary purpose is obviously to improve the performance of your system, but it gives an excellent overview and understanding of how the system actually works, which functions are actually called, in which order, where the system actually spends its time is really important when you try to kind of figure out how things work and which functions actually end up calling which other functions.
Yeah, the dev tools, I live in there when I'm working on the JavaScript side. I even, hear podcast episodes or read articles about all the things you can do with the dev tools. And sometimes I feel like even with everything I use, I still have only scratched the surface of some of the help that you get from using those tools, some of the tools that are in the dev tools.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's kind of a complicated tab. It also has this weird thing where it has like two different timelines in the same tab. So you have like a top timeline and a bottom timeline, which is kind of the window into a particular section of the top timeline. So people tend to find it really confusing to the extent that the Chrome team has actually even created a new DevTools tab called Performance Insights. Just because they think, because the Performance tab tends to be overly complex to a lot of people. So the Performance Insights tab is like a Performance tab light, as it were. It doesn't really add information that you didn't have before. It just makes it easier to get certain information. That's my war story. So now it's somebody else's turn.
All right, AJ, your turn.
All right. I don't know if mine's going to be as cool, but...
Obviously not,
I'm going to try to do something that I'm great at. Take a 2-minute story and turn it into a 20-minute story. So
great.
Back in the olden days, the job that ripped me out of college was a company that designed radars. It's actually a spinoff of the company that makes the radars that are above the stoplights and the traffic lights and stuff. So when you're going past a traffic light, you can look up and you can see these little boxes that are counting cars. And that company is called IMSAR. And that company had a spinoff company that at the time did work that through all reasonable assumption was for the military, because some of the investment came from In-Q-Tel. And In-Q-Tel is an investment arm of a 3-letter agency. So who knows who we were doing work for? I can't possibly say. I'm certainly not allowed to say, but it's public information that they got funding from In-Q-Tel. So, you can draw some lines and maybe come up with some guesses. And as both of y'all have probably experienced, have you done work for military or government before?
Like I said, I used to work at a company that did work for banks. I don't know if they're any better than the government in this regard. I actually served in the Army, and I did work for the Army while in the Army, but I don't know how that compares.
Well, things are slow, things are inefficient, things are convoluted. There's a lot of kind of faux secrecy, things that don't need to be secret, but if you can't prove that it shouldn't be secret, then sometimes it is by default. And so you get a lot of this complication of key people don't have the right information because it's being kept from them. You're trying to have 2 companies work together, but you don't tell the 2 companies that they're working together. And then you don't tell them what they're doing. You just give them vague specs that was created by yet another company. And so you end up, by the time you finally get in the room together, it's just a hot mess. And, the conversation basically says, so wait, all we needed was gzip and JSON, and we spent 6 months developing this other thing instead. Oh, too bad we couldn't have had a conversation to understand was actually preferred and desirable. Anyway, so that was kind of the environment. Was we knew that our systems were going to have to work with Windows computers, and that our customer only had approved Internet Explorer as the web browser, because you want the web browser that's the easiest to get spyware through to be the certified one. That way the upper management can always, listen in on the lower. I have no idea what their reasoning was, but for some reason, Internet Explorer was the approved browser. And
it can be either really bad or not that bad, depending on when the story took place. There were some time, if you go back enough, there were times where Internet Explorer was actually the best browser available.
0.5, baby.
Yeah, something like that. Up until then.
Yeah.
Hey there, this is Charles Max Wood. I'm excited because I wanted to let you know about this thing that I pulled together that I've been dying to have this for years, and I never felt like I could. And then I just realized that there's no reason why I can't. So I'm putting together a book club, and we're going to read development-focused books, career books, technical books, whatever. The first book that we're going to do is going to be Clean Architecture by Uncle Bob Martin. If you're not familiar with Clean Code or some of the other stuff that Bob has done, check that out. I've also talked to him on the Clean Coders podcast, which is on Top End Devs. But we're going to get on. He's going to show up to some of our meetings. And what I'm thinking is we'll probably have like 5 or 6 people part of the conversation along with Bob and I at the same time. And we'll just, so somebody can come on, they can ask their question, and then we'll just rotate people through. So we'll mute one person, unmute another person when it's their turn to come on and be part of the discussion. So we'll do that for like an hour and a half. And then the other part of it that I'm putting together is just kind of a meet and greet gather area on GatherTown. And so after the meetup and the call, what we'll do is we'll all go over to GatherTown, and you can just log in, walk up to a group and have a conversation. And that way we can all kind of get to know each other and make friends and get to know people across the world. One thing that I'm finding is that, the meetups are starting to come back, but a lot of people don't have the opportunity to go to a meetup. And I really want to meet you guys and talk to you. So we're going to put all that together. It'll all be part of that book club. You can go to topenddevs.com/book club to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there. The first book club meeting will be in December, the beginning of December. We're starting the first week of December. And you'll also be part of the conversation about which book we do next. I have one in mind, but I want to see where everybody's at. So there you go.
So this was circa 2009, I want to say, give or take a year.
Oh, yeah. By that point in time, Internet Explorer was way past its prime. When did Chrome come out? Anybody remember?
I could Google that for you.
I could Google
early 2000s.
I could Google that as well.
2003, 2004, maybe. I don't remember.
I remember Gmail coming out, and I think Chrome was announced the next year.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point being that, so what we're trying to doing is we're taking this radar that's it's producing images of how far and how close things are, and trying to map them in a way that's really easy to understand and see. And the way that we had done this up to this point was, so this was back before Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi came out while I was working for this company. And I don't know, I guess I probably shouldn't say what we actually used, but just in case still use it, because I think that they chose that vendor because that vendor had a industrial 20-year guarantee on being able to produce the same.
You don't want the military police or something knocking on your door. Is that what you're saying, AJ?
I don't think it's going to be that extreme, but I don't know. I don't know where the intellectual property has gone or what's become of it. Or at this point, I would assume that they've moved on to a better chipset, but I
never assume, AJ.
I shouldn't assume that because the reason that they chose the vendor they chose was because of the long support contracts. So even if the chip manufacturer, there's various manufacturers out there like Intel and ARM and Tech Instruments and Atmel, and so even if the chip manufacturer had continued to produce the chip, could stop producing the chip, they had a stock supply of it or whatever. So at the time, we had an actual Nintendo 64 PlayStation style yellow cable that you would a composite cable that you'd plug in, and the video processing was being done on the device. It was being written to a buffer pipe, so it would just try to write one frame and then the next frame and then the next frame and the next frame, and it was extremely rudimentary. It was basically a blue background and then red dots and then yellow squares with crosshairs going around the dots. And I think that the yellow squares were supposed to indicate the margin of error. But it was basically, it was very, very similar to the data that actually came back from the radar. So the radar is making these pulses, it's getting reflections back. And if you basically just scale that out because you know what the distances are and you know what the angles are, then it was not, I don't think it was quite 1-to-1. But the image that we got back from the radar and the way we painted the image out to the TV screen were pretty close. But I think that original one was done on basically a developer kit board. So if you, even now, there's a microcontroller that's pretty popular called Blue Pill, and you can get a developer kit version of the board, and it's got more features. It has more inputs and outputs. It just has more stuff on it, and the actual $5 Blue Pill, because the $5 Blue Pill is pared down so that it has just the minimum amount so they can reach that $5 price point. And then if you build around it, just add more stuff onto it. So if I remember correctly, the initial version of this radar was built on this development kit board, and then they stopped selling the development kit board, and then they did an end of life on that particular feature set that came on the board. So I don't remember if the processor was still available, but there's some combination of features that were no longer available. And so we were going to have to switch away from this system anyway. We had to end of life it. But the military, or our customers, whoever they were, they were perfectly happy to just plug in this yellow cable. You turn the TV on, you plug in the yellow cable, boom. But and it gave distances, and the distances were scaled fairly accurate. So it's 50 meters out, there's this target. It's moving in this direction. It's moving closer or further, left or right, and you could watch it move as the frames progressed. And there was also an XML packet system that replicated that same information. In an early version of us trying to get this thing to work for the next processor that we were going to use, we actually took the frames and we sent them across the wire as raw bytes. And the frames were formatted in a way for NTSC television. So they weren't in JPEG format or anything. It was just raw bytes. But in a very early version, I don't know if we even released this, but it was just to help us transition and get everything working again. We sent those bytes across the wire, and we had to process it from that into a JPEG. And again, it was nearly one-to-one, this raw data and what we needed to show, but it just wasn't in a recognizable format. It wasn't in an RGB format, and we had to translate it. And this isn't actually the point that I was building up to, but just as an aside, since we're talking about optimization, as part of that process, it turned out that we basically had to iterate over every pixel, so to speak, of the data, and then turn it into an actual PNG pixel. And it was too slow. It was producing, I don't know, one every 5 seconds. I'm just making up a number. I don't remember what it was, but it was something that was just too unacceptable. It wasn't real time enough to be useful. And I had probably some, recent JavaScript optimization talk, and I just started fiddling because I didn't know quite how to profile it, but I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a couple of things in this loop of translating the data that we could make more efficient. And I do remember there was two things. At the time, ES5 was new. It wasn't fully implemented. And so the for each function was not yet optimized. And the two things that I did that brought it down from something like 5 or 10 seconds down to 80 milliseconds were that, and you shouldn't do this today, because today these things run at native speed. They've been optimized, unless you find that you actually really need to change the way you're doing it. But I swapped out a for each for a for loop. And then there was a place where just naivete or reason, rather than doing a plus equals through the iteration, I was doing a times by the index. So I was saying that, the row value is I n times I or something like that.
So like instead of doing adding the number of pixels per row to the counter, you were multiplying the row number by the width or something like that.
Exactly. Well said. You got exactly what I was trying to pull out. Yes, that's exactly what I was doing. So each of those changes was incredibly significant. It required both of them, but it got it down to where it went from taking, like I was saying, 10 seconds to render an image to about 80 milliseconds, if I remember correctly. So we went from nowhere near real time to real time and cycles to spare. And anyway, this was the intermediate stage, but what we ended up doing was Google Maps had already come out, and there was also OpenStreetMap and Yahoo Maps. It turned out they all used the same system, which I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's an imperfect system that's skewed. It's based on flattening the world, but you zoom in close enough, the squares are accurate enough. When you zoom out, the squares are really, really inaccurate because, a square that represents Alaska is much larger than it actually is, whereas the square of something represents something at the equator is smaller than it ought to be. It's one of those type of scaling issues. But we were able to get the Google Maps downloaded. I mean, not Google Maps. The open maps, the free stuff that had no copyright entanglements, which is, of course, is what we encouraged our customer to use, the one that had no copyright entanglements, of course. So we were able to ship the demo of the product with the open API, OpenStreetMaps or whatever. And then if they happened to read that we reverse engineered that from the Google Maps and swapped the URL, what are we to say? But we created this great map system where we could overlay, and then we could get the position of those targets and have them, everything was scaled properly, and have the targets move on the map. So you could see something was half kilometer away, a kilometer away. You'd see it on the real pre-downloaded pixels or map tiles. And the thing is, we couldn't do this in Internet Explorer, because I don't remember what all the challenges were. I mean, even starting from getting some of the data processed to just having the right APIs to use for, I don't even remember where they were, but I know that we didn't have this thing when we worked on this version. We did not have it working in Internet Explorer, and we just didn't think it would be feasible to get working in Internet Explorer. And they told us that, we had to make it work on Internet Explorer. And we basically just said, we meaning I just said no. And we built it to work in Firefox. I don't know if we had it in Chrome, but we built it to work in Firefox, and we showed them a demo of this map system that was far superior to the system that they had before, where they plug in the yellow cable and get the blue screen with the red dots. And I think there was some amount of heat map-esqueness to it, where maybe it had some green or something too. But, we replaced that with the open street maps view and these, live moving targets that are updating several times a second. And in the web interface, you could actually pick what color you wanted them, or you could choose to ignore one. So we had all of these features that they'd never really imagined that we would be able to deliver in this next version of the product. And when they saw it, they figured out how to make an exception to get Firefox as an approved browser for this specific application. And this is something where this is the reverse. My experience to date would not have me make that decision again. If I were to go back, or not if I were back, but if I were to have some similar situation present itself again, I would not try to fight against the powers that be, because most of the time the powers that be win, and the powers that be are providing your paycheck, right? And it's one of those things where only the blissful idiocy of youth allowed me to create a solution that, it was a good solution. There wasn't a better alternative. It was leaps and bounds ahead of the alternative. But just the idea of kind of, in a way, sticking it to the man and saying, no, we're going to provide a product so good that you're going to change your rules and your policies to fit our product into your set of bureaucratic tape. I don't know that I've got the chicharrones to attempt something like that with all of the other experiences that I've had since that time. It was just such I don't know if it was quite fluke would be the right way to call it, but it was fortunate. And there may have been some other forces, because it was a life-saving device from, these devices we suspect were used in areas where people with guns were coming up against people who were trying to defend a particular area that was being held. And so it may have been that the life-saving benefit of it was so great, which is not what I was thinking about. I was just thinking about, user experience, looking cool, being something that no one else had created before, being head and shoulders above the previous solutions or anybody else's, because we had a couple competitors. Nobody had something like this.
So they ultimately ended up choosing your improved solution despite the fact that it didn't work on Internet Explorer?
Yeah, so they actually were able to change their regulations, and they found a way to get Firefox approved for the systems that this was going to be deployed with. So, but like I said, I don't know if I would be able to do that again today. If I had the experience and the wisdom that I have now, I don't know if I would have been that gutsy.
I don't know if you'll have time for it, but I have a funny story where I did not have the guts or the foresight or the know-how to tell no, and the consequences were a bit unfortunate.
Steve, do you got one you want to share?
Yeah, I got a story. And then we got time after that, then Dan, we can squeeze yours in. I don't see why not from a time standpoint. Mine won't take nearly as long as yours guys did. This is, I guess you call it a success story. So you fit in the old cliche of thinking outside the box. So back in my last place where I was working on Drupal, this was back in about 2019, I was working for a very, very large international mega corporation and manufacturing industrial type corporation. And we were working on re-releasing our site. For context, the original older site was on something like Classic ASP and Microsoft 2000, some sort of framework and SQL Server, and just, being held together with rubber bands and paper clips type of thing. And so we had brought open source into the organization my boss had, and we're using Drupal. And it was sort of I don't know if you call it a pyramid or tripod type approach, where you had two Drupal sites on the back end that were data repositories. One was for just, product information, and one was a digital asset management type site. So your images and documents and graphics and logos and all that kind of stuff. And then instead of just using a standard front end, we indexed everything into Apache Solr and then used Solr as our data for the front end, just because it's faster. Well, the problem, and this is sort of a side note, was that we were still using PHP templating on the front end. So I spent more times dealing with caching issues and performance issues because of that, as compared to using something maybe a little better for the front end to pull from Solar. But one issue that came to be very crucial was 301 redirects. So with a very, very, very large site and amount of data that we had on the old site, we would take a major hit if all of a sudden all our indexed links and old links stopped working when we launched the new site. And at this point in time, it was in the spring, the site launch had already been delayed by a number of months just because it wasn't ready at the originally planned launch date. Wasn't even close. And so we were coming up again on our next launch date. And we had one guy that was, it was funny. His Slack logo was like a highway sign with a 301 on it, because that's all he worked on was 301s. And the issue was, how do you store them in the site in a way that they can be, accessible? And we had literally hundreds of thousands of them. I'd put in 250,000 at a time sometime. And we were trying them in text files and all types of different mechanisms and ways to access them. But everything was just killing performance just because of the size, the pure size and the number of 301 redirects that we had. So it's Monday evening. We're supposed to launch this Saturday. So within, 5 days. And my boss is still just pulling his hair out, couldn't get anything to work. And I had an idea. So about 5:00 that evening, a Monday evening, I called him up and I said, "Hey, I know you're working on this still. How's that going?" "Well, not good. I can't get this and that." And I said, "I know we haven't thought about this, but why don't we use Solar for stashing our redirects and then just access them from the site? There's a way we can do it so-and-so." And he thought about it for about 5 seconds. He goes, "Damn, that's a good idea." And so it was the end of the day. So I said, "Yeah, let's do that tomorrow. I know exactly how we could do it." I was pretty familiar with Solar, having been in charge of maintaining our Solar instances and clusters and configurations and all that. And so the next morning I go log on, and my direct report, my supervisor that I'd reported directly, I had a message in Slack said, "Go, Steve, go." Because he was so excited, because this was just like the last big issue that was really holding up the launch of the site. And so what I did was went in and built a new index, defined the fields in the Solar configs, find everything we did. And then the other guy that I've been working on, Todd, he and I worked on some code, both on in the Drupal side, that would handle what to do, how to run the Solar query to get what you want, and then redirect to the appropriate URL. And then I also wrote a couple drush commands. Drush stands for Drupal shell. It's a command line utility, sort of like Tinker or console commands in Laravel or any other type of server-side language utility, where people could just run it and put a particular redirect into Solar and delete them and clean them up and so on. And then we just did a lot of bulk updating. So long story short, well, that's not really short, but the end result was that we were able to launch the site on time. There was always ongoing issues with maintenance and, keeping up and maintaining the redirects, and maybe some tweaks to the tools and other things, but it was incredibly fast. And I always intended to write a blog post for us, or maybe we're on Pantheon, because Pantheon was the hosting provider that we were using. Never did get around to it, but the whole thing that made me proud, I guess, of my idea was that we were under pressure, had to come with an idea, and I just sort of thought out of the box in a way that people hadn't thought of, and was able to make it work, implement it, and handle hundreds of thousands of redirects in a pretty efficient manner.
So I want to understand this technically a little bit better, because when I'm thinking, if you have all of these, when you said file-based, I'm thinking something like an HTML
even just a text file, CSV file, some sort of simple file structure. You have basically where you're mapping old URLs to new URLs. Okay. I see what you're saying. And so putting in a CSV wasn't fast enough because it wasn't indexed, and it would have to go through each row to find something that was just too slow. And so in Apache Solar, was that better in trying to use a SQL database? Was there something particular about it that gave it an edge there for that? Well, Solar is designed for search. It's key value store basically, but it's designed to find things quickly as compared to a SQL table. And it was, we had all our data in SQL, but we're using Drupal and as PHP templating on the front end. And just as a proof of concept, I wrote a view front end that searched a given index and had pagination and all kinds of stuff. And the speed was off the charts. It was so much faster going through solar. I could literally click and it was instantaneous paginating through results, finding results much quicker than anything I'd ever seen in SQL. Just because, like I said, it's designed to quickly find things. And in this case, there wasn't a lot of text manipulation you had to do. You weren't worrying about index searching and full text searching and stemming and all the things that go into indexing your data so that it's easy to find. It was really just, here's one URL, find another URL. And from a size standpoint, putting stuff in Solar, we had a lot more room there, I guess, and flexibility than we did dumping hundreds of thousands of records into, MySQL, which is the database that we're using as our backend.
And the MySQL database was doing other stuff too.
Yeah, it's the main source for the Drupal. But, that was Drupal 7. So not only did you have data, you had configuration stuff in Drupal as well. It wasn't until Drupal 8 that they went with an external configuration management system using some sort of ML files. I forget.
So that would kind of make sense why it'd be slower, because it's not just trying to handle these hundreds of thousands of redirects, but it's also trying to handle the data for the site. And so it probably, using this Solar, had fewer responsibilities. So it was able to dedicate more resources to that really important task.
Mm-hmm. And that's a key takeaway that I take from this, is that we generally like to reuse the systems that we already have in place. And very often it does work, but sometimes it doesn't. And then it's worthwhile, like you said, to kind of think out of the box and think, what are the actual constraints that I have on the data? Maybe I can use a different system that actually leverages these constraints to actually gain better behavior or better performance. And like you said, given that you were just mapping one string into the other, something that's a key value sort of a map is potentially much more efficient than just working, searching through some sort of a database that, like AJ said, is loaded and is and provides a lot of functionality that you don't actually need in this case.
Yeah, I need to go back and correct one thing, AJ. So the database was used to store data, but the front end was actually pulling from Solar. So all of our data, products and paths, logos and graphics and that kind of stuff was in Solar, and the front end was pulling from that. But it was still being used, for writes, adding data and that kind of stuff, plus configuration information. So, but Solar, we had a lot more, it was easier to upscale and add indexes and change things as needed than it was from a MySQL standpoint. And as far as I know, that site is still, as I understand it, that site is still up and running using that same infrastructure.
That's always cool to find something that you did a while back and see that it still works and serves its purpose.
Yep. So Dan, you said you had one more
story? So I'll tell it quickly or briefly. So this one takes me way, way back. So I'm talking actually the .com days, late 90s. I was
working before I was born.
Oh yeah. Okay, if you say so. Anyway, so we're talking late 90s, and I'm working at this hot startup, and what we are doing is we had this mechanism which could leverage unused bandwidths. What I mean is that back then, if you wanted to watch video online, the streaming protocols were just not practical given bandwidth constraints that existed back then, and the protocols that existed back then. It just wasn't effectively workable. So if you wanted to actually watch a video from the web, you would actually need to download that video in order to watch it. And who wants to watch a video that you need to wait, 2 hours for it to download before you can actually do anything with it? So the system that we had in place was one that was able to download large chunks of data in the background by leveraging the unused bandwidth. So think about it. If you're browsing the web, you download stuff into your browser, but then you basically just read the site that you downloaded. So most of the time, the network connection is available. But if you start a big download and you don't get out of the way once the user clicks the link in the browser, then you degrade their experience. So what you want is a system that can identify when network bandwidth is available, start downloading stuff, and then automatically pause that download, immediately whenever it discovers that the user actually requires their bandwidth. And that's kind of like the intellectual property that the company that I was working at that time had kind of invented, this kind of a mechanism for downloading large stuff in the background without adversely impacting your browsing experience. So that you could say, download this huge video and let me know when it finishes, whenever it finishes, and stuff like that. And when we implemented it, when we started implementing the client side for this, it was like a custom client that used the web or the internet, but it wasn't like browser based. It was like custom software that you installed on your computer. And Windows 95 had come out not that long before. So, I'm really dating this story. And what people had before Windows 95 was Windows 3.1 or 3.11, which were terrible systems. They were like 16-bit. They didn't really multitask.
You did not grow up playing Fisher-Price School Bus on DOS, apparently.
Well, I worked in DOS before, but I'm not going that far back. All I'm saying is that Windows 3.1 or 3.11 as an operating system was pretty abysmal because it was not much more than sort of a visual facade on top of DOS in a lot of ways. So it was like all the processes ran in the same memory space. It was just 16-bit, not 32-bit. It didn't really multitask, like the processes had to relinquish control and whatnot. It was pretty bad. And so we said, hey, Windows 95 has just come out. What, it's gonna, why support those older systems? There's no point. So we wrote our client software for Windows 95 using all the new capabilities that were available in this much more quote unquote modern operating system. And then we brought in investors. And one of the investors that we brought in was SoftBank. The guys that invested in WeWork, in Alibaba, and various other companies. They exist still today. They're pretty huge. And they liked what they saw, and they were willing to invest millions of dollars in the company. But they had a catch. They said, our market and analysts say that it's going to take years, maybe even decades, for Windows 95 to replace those older systems. So if you want our millions of dollars, you need to support those older versions of Windows as well. So you need to backport your client software to also run on that Windows 3.1 or 3.11 in addition to Windows 95. And I'm talking, this is like 97 or something like that. And we kind of tried to...
What were they smoking?
And we kind of, and unlike you, while we did try to argue, at the end of the day, they were adamant and it was their money. So we formed within the company a 3-man team. And think about it, for a startup to allocate 3 people to work on something, that's like, I don't know, that was like a third or a quarter of our entire development team. And we worked on, and I was part of that team, fortunately, unfortunately, and we worked on it for like a whole year, backporting that system. So it's like 3-man years of backporting that software to run on Windows 3.1. And we succeeded. It worked. So we actually were able to release that as a product. Now, the interesting thing is, because it was a web-based product, it had telemetry. So whenever it was like for the consumer market, but whenever somebody installed that software on their computer, we would get information about it. So we knew how many people were using our software at any point in time and where they were coming from and whatnot. So like after we released it, we had, I don't know, like tens of thousands of users on Windows 95. And how many people on Windows 3.1? Can you guess?
Was it a perfect goose egg?
No, it wasn't. There were something like 3 users. Yeah. So, For the win. So we invested something like 3 man years of effort on supporting 3 users because that was a condition for getting the money from SoftBank.
Man, who could have guessed that multimedia software would have caught on for a system that didn't have a multimedia player.
Yeah. Well, on the positive side, we did get the investment money and we were able to go public before the dot-com bubble burst. And the company did reach a valuation of a couple of billions of dollars before it went back to nothing. So, I was able to exercise some stock options and it did help me buy my first house. So, it turned out good in the end. But I wish we could have told them to you're idiots or whatnot, and please give us your money without forcing us to create this version that nobody needs and nobody asked for.
So what if you hadn't done it though? What would have the consequences have been if you just on it, dedicated very little resources to it, and just always said, "Oh yeah, we're just delayed."
It's the big cost is the alternative cost. It's like the thing that we probably would have been able to deliver other things much, much earlier. It's really difficult for me to try to guess what would have happened if things would have turned out better or worse. Who knows? I think it would have done a big service to the company. But like I said, you could say that the company got some millions of dollars for this project, even if at the end of the day, that project wasn't really needed for the success of the company. So effectively, you could say that we sold this as a product to SoftBank for the investment bucks. So I really can't say at the end of the day, how much of a difference it would have made. I have to think that spending like a third of your R&D team on something that's totally not beneficial for a startup company for I think it was something like a whole year. I can't imagine that being a good thing for any startup.
I'm more wondering what would the repercussions have been. Because a lot of times in life, what I think about, there's the rules, and if you break the rules, there's a consequence. And so, for example, library books, right? If you rent a library book and you don't return it on time, the fee is usually something so incredibly small that it doesn't even matter, right? 50 cents.
Oh, like that episode on Seinfeld?
I don't know that episode on Seinfeld, but probably yes.
Yeah, there's an episode where he's being chased by a library cop for a book he supposedly didn't return when he was a teen or something like that.
Well, it takes a long time. You have to be, 5 years late before they charge you for the cost of the book. And I don't know if they ever charge you for the cost of the book. At some point you hit a maximum fee, I think, with most libraries. And if you just have the book forever and you never return it, you're just not allowed to go back to the library to get a new book. But the cost of not returning a library book is so incredibly small, it's in the noise. And that's what I'm saying is when you think of what the rules are and what the consequences are of breaking the rules, and I had this in college. So we had these cleaning checks. Well, you always fail your cleaning check. It takes you 4 hours to clean everything. And if you fail the cleaning check, then they charge you, say, $20 and life moves on. So am I going to spend 4 hours cleaning the day before I have some important assignment due or that I want to go out on a date? Or am I going to fail the cleaning check and pay $20? And I most likely would have failed even if I had spent the 4 hours cleaning, because they like to fail you. They like to, they put their finger on the, the seventh window blind from the top. And if dust comes off, you failed, right? So there's a lot of things in life where you can play, let's say, rather than play by the rules, you can play to the rules or against the rules or however you want to say it, where you can take the consequence of breaking the rule and have a much larger gain than if you followed the rule. That's what I'm asking about this situation is if you had broken your agreement, what would the consequence have been negative for you and your company?
Well, to be honest, I don't know. That's a question for the guy who was the CEO of the company, who's, by the way, now I'm still kind of in touch with him, and he's like a billionaire. So I imagine that his life turns out okay despite this episode. So everybody came out ahead in the end, except maybe SoftBank. It made a lot of money of selling their investment in Alibaba, but we can beat me. I guess everybody will guess which word I used. So I don't know what the consequences have been. I assume the fact that he had us still working on it for that entire duration meant that either he had bigger fish to fry or he just couldn't get out of it. But again, at that point in time, I was just a junior developer doing what I was told. So it was what it was.
Have you ever wished that you had a group of people that were just as passionate about writing code as you are? I know I did. I did that for most of my career. I'd go to the meetups. I'd try and create other opportunities. And it was just really hard, right? The meetups, I got some of that, but they were only like once or twice a month. And it was just really hard to find that group of people that I connected with and really wanted to, talk about code a lot, right? I mean, I love writing code. I think it's the best. And so I've decided to create this community and create it a worldwide community that we can all jump in and do it. So we're going to have 2 workshops every week. One of those or 2 of those every month are going to be Q&A calls, right? Where you can get on, you can ask me or me and another expert questions. The rest of them are going to be focused on different aspects of career or programming or things like that, right? So it'll go anywhere from like deployments and containers all the way up to managing your 401k and negotiating your benefits package. We'll cover all of it, okay? And then we're also going to have meetups every month for your particular technology area. So we have shows about JavaScript, React, Angular, Vue, and so on. We're going to have meetups for all of those things. I'm going to revive the freelancer show. We'll have one about that, right? So you can get started freelancing or continue freelancing if that's where you're at. And I'm working on finding authors who can actually do weekly video tutorials on something for 10 minutes that's related, to those technology areas so that you can stay current and keep growing. So if you're interested, go to topenddevs.com/sign up and you can get in right now for $39. When we're done, that price is going to go up to $75. And the $39 price gets you access to 2 calls per week. The full price at $150, which is going to be $75 over the next few weeks, that price is going to get you access to all of the calls and all of the tutorials and everything else that we put out from Top End Devs, along with member pricing for our remote conferences that are coming up next year. So go check it out, topenddevs.com/sign up.
Alrighty. So with that, we're going a bit long. So we're going to turn to picks. Picks are the part of the show where we get to talk about things we like to talk about that may or may not have to do with tech, books, food, movies, ATV crashes, you name it. We can talk about it. So let's start with Dan. What do you got first for picks, Dan?
Okay, so for my first pick, I actually attended a conference in Israel yesterday and today, this time not as a speaker, but as an attendee. And I had a great time. It's called Reverse Theme Conference. So basically it's just like going in reverse, but I don't know, like it's a sort of a wordplay. It's from this really popular podcast, that tech conference podcast in Israel, and they started a conference. So that's what it's about. And I had a great time there. It was a in-person conference, and there were a lot of hallway interactions, which were great. But what I specifically want to call out is that person that we've had on our show as a guest, Moran Weber. I forget which episode it was. You can check in the background. But she gave a talk about titled "Code Like a Girl: Breaking the Gender Stereotype," and it was an amazing talk. And she just she gives real world data about stuff like why it is that women are still to this day relatively underrepresented in the tech industry. And it turns out that it wasn't always this way, that up until something like the mid 80s, working with computers was actually considered a quote unquote feminine job, something that's appropriate for women to do. And it was only like sometime in the 80s that this sort of inversion took place that has never been fully kind of rectified. And she gave like interesting insights about it and why you may want to do something about it and what you can actually do about it. And it was a really cool talk, and maybe we should have her on our show again to actually talk about that. So it was really great, and I wanted to shout that out. So that's one pick. Another pick that I have, I don't know why, but I started rereading this really, let's call it oldie but goodie science fiction book called The Moat in God's Eye. It's by, the author it was actually co-written by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, both of them well-known science fiction writers. And I'm enjoying it a lot. I think I read it 20, 30 years ago. I don't remember it. So I'm reading it now, and I recommend it. So if you like that sort of thing, if you like hard science fiction books, it's kind of slightly dated. I mean, you run into futuristic technology that's not as sophisticated as what we have now, like smartphones. They didn't consider the concept. So people are constantly with Star Wars, where, they constantly go to these intercoms on the wall when they're in the ship, and you're thinking, hey, why don't you just, use something like a smartphone or whatever? But it's still a great book, and I'm enjoying it. So I'd like to shout that out as well. And my third and final pick is, as always, the ongoing war in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are being successfully pushing back the Russians. And the Russians are retaliating in what can only be called crimes against humanity by explicitly targeting civilian and infrastructure and the actual civilians themselves, using rockets, using Iranian drones, like suicide drones that literally dive into people's houses and blow them up. So it's quite terrible. And again, anything that you can do to help, I urge you to do. And those would be my picks for today.
And just for reference, the episode with Milan Weber was number 483 of JavaScript Jabber. We'll put that in the show notes. AJ, what do you have for picks?
So first off, I pick what I didn't have and should have had I realized it. There are these protective vests / jackets that have semi-rigid foam structures in them that, if we're to say, for example, go into the mountains as an East Coast quad biker, not realizing the dangers of West Coast mountain quad biking, and then flip the four-wheeler onto yourself and crush your back, that you'd really, really want to be wearing. So I hurt myself on Saturday. I was going up an incline that was fairly steep, but it wasn't the kind of thing, I don't know. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't experienced enough to be worried about it. And my front tire I don't exactly know what happened, because it all happened in a matter of 2 seconds. But my front didn't happen. The front tire, the front of the four-wheeler just popped up. And I think maybe what happened was I was thinking that I was just going to go over this big rock. And so I was continuing to give it gas. But the angle of the rock and the angle of the incline, instead, the four-wheeler just flipped up. And I don't remember if I actually actively jumped off the four-wheeler. I kind of have a memory that that's what happened, or if I was just thrown off it. But I distinctly remember looking at the handlebars and thinking the word throat, as in, do whatever you can so that doesn't land on your throat, because if it crushes your throat, bye-bye AJ. And so I reached my hands out and I kicked my feet up towards the seat. And then there's just this knuckle popping kind of thing. And my back just cracked. And now I have some lower back pain. I'm going to go see a doctor about it. I don't think it's anything more than a sprain, but I'm closer to 40 than I am to 20. So probably good to get it checked out. Anyway, I think the situation would have been way better if, one, I had followed my own rule, which is when you're familiar with the terrain, be particularly cautious. I thought I was more familiar with the terrain than I was, because I'd been in that area before. I'd never had the four-wheeler pop up on me like that. It typically, just goofing off and making it pop up on purpose, it'll pop up a couple of inches. It won't pop straight back. But, and then, to have some protection. So, for anybody that is unaware, and you can get these things as cheap as $100. So totally worth it. Rocky Mountain ATV sell a whole bunch of them, and they're called body armor or protection jackets or protection shirts. There's kind of technical differences between the different styles of whether they provide protection in the elbow and the sleeve, or whether it's just a quote unquote roost protector, which is protection in the chest and in the back. But I'm definitely getting one of those before I go riding again. And I'm definitely going to be a lot smarter. Well, hopefully Yeah, I'm gonna be more cautious next time I go out, and I'm gonna be more aware that one, with mountain terrain, it's more unpredictable how the four-wheeler is going to behave, and two, with mountain terrain, when you fall, it hurts a lot more because you're falling on large rocks, not nice East Coast dirt. So yeah, there's that. Also, I think I picked last time. Did I pick last time Project Hail Mary? I think
You've mentioned it a couple of times. You might have sort of picked it. I don't remember. I think you kind of.
I don't remember.
Well, that's a book.
I remember you mentioning it.
That's a book that I recently finished, and it was pretty good. It was kind of cartoony in a sense. It wasn't anywhere at the level of a Brandon Sanderson book of feeling that just depth of character and world development. But it was enjoyable, and I think it would make a good movie. It's by the same guy that did The Martian. And then I'm going to anti-pick Twilight. I'm going to listen to the entire Twilight book. But from the first couple chapters, you can totally see how Shades of Grey came from it. And as the chapters continue, it just doesn't get better. I mean, this is an empty, hollow shell of a human who her only identifying characteristic is that she's in love with someone who says that he hates her and loves her and wants to kill her and wants to keep her alive. So, I mean, I think I'm 10 or 12 chapters in now, and that's the story. I mean, I thought the movies were hilarious, but the book is sick.
You have more perseverance than I do. I didn't neither the book nor the movies. I do recall that it was said that it was written as something like fan fiction for the Twilight.
50 Shades. But I can see how it came from that, because people say, "Oh, it's nothing like it's not. This is a vampire story. It's about love." No, it's about a massive sadist. The girl is like, she needs psychological help. I mean, I don't know what the author was thinking in portraying a teenage girl this way. Is this the way that she believes teenage girls think? Is it common for teenage girls to think this way?
I have no idea. Anyway.
But it's twisted. It is. But anyway, I want to finish it because, I mean, and people love this book, and I have no idea how they love it. It's disgusting. But I want to finish it so that I've finished it, so I've given it a fair shot. I have no intent the other books.
I have to tell you that I have no patience for stuff like that. So, for example, I tried to watch Rings of Power, and I like made it into like episode 2 or something, and I just can't. And I don't try to force myself. It's Tolkien fan fiction. I have no patience for Tolkien fan fiction, and that's that.
Well, the last thing, changing gears, no pun intended, honestly, is it's difficult to find a complete wrench set in metric that has all of them, because if you work on metric stuff, everything's fair game. When you work in the imperial system, you're not going to find a 63/64 wrench, right? There's, as you get larger in sizes, you're not going to go to the 64th or the 32nd. It's going to continue on a scale where that makes sense. But in the metric tool set, every tool is 1 millimeter larger. Now, when you start to get to something like 30 millimeters, there's so little difference between 29 millimeters, 30 millimeters, and 31 millimeters that it doesn't even make sense. Why would you have those numbers? And it kind of feels that way too when you get up towards numbers like even 22. Do you need a 21? Like, there should be no reason that you would ever need a 21 millimeter wrench. But yet sometimes you do, because it's standardized. They exist, even though it seems so. There's this Duratec combination wrench set that it's the only reasonably priced wrench set that I could find that actually has every number between 8 millimeter and 22 millimeter, which I need working on the four-wheeler, because sometimes I actually need, most sets don't include a 16 millimeter, for example, or an 18 millimeter or 20 millimeter, because normally it's like 15, then 17, then 19, then 22. But there are parts that have come up where I actually need that in-between size that is, a part of the metric system. And so I found this Duratec set that I'll link to that has everything between 8 and 22. And I was quite happy to find it because I've gone to Lowe's and Home Depot and Harbor Freight, and you can get these $300 toolkits, include a ton of stuff, but it's been hard to find I just want every size of metric wrench, and I guess some of them, if you if you take the imperial sizes they give you and the metric sizes they give you, then I think you actually kind of do have every size within half a millimeter. But I just prefer to have the millimeter set and only the millimeter set. And then if I ever need the imperial set, I can deal with the half millimeter difference at that time. So that's the last one.
So AJ, I have a suggestion for you that incorporates some of what Dan just talked about, and with one of your picks. You were talking about the safety vests, that protect your chest.
Well, particularly
my son and I, the chest and the back. My son and I are reading through the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And if you remember, this actually sort of goes back to The Hobbit, actually. But my suggestion would be a coat of mithril. That's the armor that was created by the dwarves, and coat of mithril. It's incredibly valuable. It was given to Frodo and actually saves him when he gets jabbed by some orcs in the mines of Moria. So if you can find some, I would suggest one of those because they seem to be very strong.
I checked that out. They call this stuff D30, but maybe if I dig into it, maybe it's the same molecular compound.
Could be. All right. So finally, my picks, my dad jokes of the week. So, when I first moved into my house, we had some delays in getting internet. And so I had one neighbor who let me use their unsecured wireless for a while, which I needed for work. And I had some other neighbors similar, and I thought they were really good people too. But then they actually put a password on their wireless. They wouldn't let me share it anymore. So, okay, moving along. Fun fact. Did you know?
I missed it.
I thought they were good people until they put a password on their wireless. They were being mean and not letting me use it anymore. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
Did you know that T-shirt, we guys wear T-shirts, is actually short for Tyrannosaurus shirt, and that's because of the shorter arms.
Okay.
Right?
I like that. No, that was good. That one landed for me.
And then finally, I was, being Halloween, my son came up and asked me a question the other day, and he says, "Dad, how do you cast spells?" I said, "Well, you just follow the instructions." He said, "Well, which instructions?" I said, "Yeah, those ones."
Okay.
That one landed for me too.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. So that's it with picks and our episode of JavaScript Jabber. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we will talk to everybody next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.
Okay, here's how Miro works. See, it's amazing.
What's everyone doing at David's desk?
Ever since marketing started using Miro's collaborative online whiteboard, he thinks all our other teams should sign up.
Why?
He says Miro's making his meetings disappear. And if every team gets on it, that means even less meetings. They're using Miro for brainstorms, mind maps, customer research.
So could we use Miro instead of having another 100 meetings for every round of feedback?
Yep. You can comment, react to ideas, even leave a recording on the board.
And what about presentations?
There are Miro templates for that.
How do you know so much about Miro?
I've actually been using it all along. I just used a Miro board to plan the best vacation.
Okay, I'm on board.
See how Miro users save up to 80 hours every year by meeting less and doing more. Get on board at Miro.com with 3 boards free forever. That's MIRO.com.